Took a little sip of water. Stay hydrated, guys, because I've been speaking for 10 minutes and didn't realize that we went live. So that actually works out really well because I didn't like how I started this at all. And today we'll be discussing all the news about Trae Young, where it seemingly the end of the Trae Young era is coming potentially to a close. I thought, yes, this all started when the extension that he wanted, a max one, was not given to him before the start of the season. And he has a player option of $48.6 million this coming season that most likely is going to get picked up regardless of what team he is on. And in my opinion, I thought they were going to get Kumbaya. They're going to have a good season. He either was going to get the max contract, and even if it was a bad season or continued to be the season that he's had so far, they were going to be able to get him on a below max contract extension. And if it all works out, they're able to look back at this as an opportunity that they capitalize on to get him at a bargain rate. And they end up having one of the best players who statistically is the best passer since Steve Nash, and arguably behind Nikola Jokic is the second best passer in the NBA on a bargain rate. Now, whatever team if he does get traded, because they've said this could just get resolved in the offseason, either by trade or extension, is what Shams Charania is saying. And we'll discuss the reporting my colleague Michael Scotto mentioned today on hoopshype.com. Go check it out, his work, and also check out mine while you're there. That the Timberwolves, the Bucks, the Clippers, and Wizards are all interested. And we heard the Wizards yesterday from Mark Stein at the Stein Line. So let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. What do you guys think and why about what potential teams could be trading for Trae Young? And we'll get into all the discussions and how they could fit and whatnot. But what I find interesting about this is, I've mentioned it before, somebody's going to get a all NBA player on a basically diminished trade value. So they're saying that they might have to actually attach a pick to move him. And I know he's undersized, but he's really the closest thing to Steph Curry in terms of what his gravity and shooting ability is. I know the defense isn't there, but the passing ability is incredible. And he in the right system, and we saw that in that Eastern Conference Finals run where basically everybody on that lineup was 6'7" or taller. What they had, like Solomon Hill, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Danilo Gallinari, all right, Clint Capella, and so John Collins, like a bunch of guys. The two shortest dudes on that team was Lou Will and Trae Young, and everybody else was like 6'6" and above. And that's kind of what you need to do with a guy like him. So to me, I'm just surprised that we're at this point. Again, hit that like and subscribe button, and I'd like to hear what you guys have to say in terms of what do you guys think of this report. And we're going to go right here and break down what exactly we're hearing. What I find most interesting about this, and this is all coming from my colleague at hoopshype.com, Michael Scotto. Shout out Scotto, baby. I just saw him like 3 weeks ago when we were at the G League Showcase. Okay, so what we're hearing is four-time All-Star, former All-NBA player, and the franchise leader in three-point makes and assists, a CAA client. Austin Brown is his representation, to be exact, is working together on a potential trade destination with the front office, Anse Saleh, as ESPN first reported. And we all knew this once both sides didn't get that extension that I mentioned earlier before the start of the season. Mark Stein at the Stein Line yesterday reported that the Wizards have discussed a trade centered around CJ McCollum, who's making $30.6 million on an expiring deal, and noted that the Wizards are actually seeking additional draft capital as Young has a $48.9 million player option for next season that more than likely he will pick up. In addition, the Bucks, the Timberwolves, and the Clippers have been monitoring Young's situation. The Bucks are turning over every unturned rock that they possibly can to find some help for Giannis Antetokounmpo. They will sell everything they can to try to make this team work with Giannis before or if Giannis forces their hand and asks them for a trade because the cupboard is empty, if I could speak. Now, they rank 26th in the league in points per game, 113.3, and they could do a deal centered around KPJ, Bobby Portis, and Kyle Kuzma. The Timberwolves have been actively exploring the trade market for a starting point guard. Mike Conley isn't bad, and Mike Conley would probably be included in this deal as he is a alkalite of Quinn Snyder from back in their Utah days. That had some of his best seasons there. So would be a seamless fit there and a good way if he were to get traded at the end of his career, which seemingly might be the last season, going to a former coach in a situation where he could get some spot starts and be a solid backup for the Hawks. I think he'd be interested in that. And then Julius Randle and Rob Dillingham, no picks, probably Dillingham's the trade sweetener. Then we're hearing, like I said, with the Bucks, I don't know what trade sweetener they'd have. Maybe instead of Kevin Porter, it's Ryan Rollins as the trade sweetener, who's having a great season. While the Clippers, they've had a recent winning spurt, but they've had an underwhelming season. And the long-term plan, or even timeline, if you want to say, for James Harden has become a bit dimmed. And he is making $42.3 million. However, that's an option next year. And he's going to pick it up. But it's not fully guaranteed till July 11th. And if they were to waive him or trade him before that, if he went to the Hawks, 13.3 is the partial guaranteed. So a waiving him or trading him, whatever it may be, and then another team just waiving him, that's a dead cap of only 13.3, savings of $29 million. And that's a good trade chip. And we know that these trade discussions will pick up as we near the February trade deadline. The 27-year-old Trae Young has suffered a right quad contusion that has him sidelined after coming back from that MCL injury, where the Hawks were actually seemingly playing very well without him. And that's kind of like led to all these trade reports and really what made people probably to think that, oh, he could get traded. This might happen. So let's get into it. I think we're going to start over here with the Washington Wizards, just because that's a situation I think that most people are aware of, and it's an interesting one to say the least. We made a video about it yesterday, so we won't spend too much time on it. Right here, the Washington Wizards, they're definitely, I would say, able to maybe give the best package in terms of if the Hawks want to do a gap year, so because they have that Pelicans pick, which they've said in no shape or form they're going to trade that Pelicans pick, which if I were them, I'm in the same agreement, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not trading that pick for any reason. Now, stay hydrated. What is the trade value that we're hearing? Despite the Hawks sitting at 17-21, which is about middle of the pack, and in terms of like league standing and kind of looking like a bottom playoff team, maybe a play-in team, he is a guy who's still an elite offensive engine. In 10 games played this season, he's averaged 19 points, just under 9 assists per game. His shooting hasn't really been there, and it's because he's not been able to get into a rhythm. 41% from the field, 30% from three. However, that playmaking gravity is exactly what teams are going to be looking for. So when you look at a team like the Washington Wizards, I think there's two trades that could happen. And this one we talked about yesterday, which was the CJ McCollum plus Corey Kesper for Luke Kennard and Trae Young. Now, I said maybe in a world they have to include Asa Newell instead of a pick for this, because the Wizards currently are 27th in the league, 9-25. They have the worst defense in the league, and they're 14th in the East. They're a team that, with CJ McCollum's averaging 19 points per game, he's 34 years old. He doesn't fit the timeline of that team. Expiring contract that allows Washington to pivot to a younger franchise cornerstone who's already solidified. Alex Sarr looks fantastic. Bilal Coulibaly, Keyshawn George, and company are all able to really mask some of the defense of liability that Trae Young is. And the other thing is maybe Cam Whitmore could be included in this deal for the Hawks if they care for, even though Cam seemingly might have a little bit of some problems that people are trying to keep some under wraps, but that's whatever. The reason why the Wizards would do this is that Trae accelerates the rebuild, pairing him with Alex Sarr, and I think this would be like Trey Johnson, probably the guy that would be the backcourt partner, which would be a high-scoring backcourt. Now, would there be some volatility on defense? Of course, but you could also do a deal where instead of Luke Kennard, it could be Onyeka Okongwu, and you have Marvin Bagley thrown in the deal with Corey Kispert, and that will allow Alex Sarr to play the power forward, Onyeka Okongwu to go ahead and play center, and then you have yourself Bagley leaving and being a decent guy. And I think this allows Sarr to potentially slide to the 4 and play in a twin tower setup that I think would be beneficial for this team. Now, I'll show you the 2 lineups of that. I do really like the idea of Trae Johnson and company just being put with a guy like Trae Young. Obviously, the goal wouldn't be this season, but it would be next. You could just do this deal straight up, Luke Kennard and Trae Young. You wouldn't have to expand it. That's one way of the deal, but they're saying there would be a need for trade sweetener. So if it's like, you could just do this deal. This does work. And that might be the deal that ends up giving them, the trade sweetener that they look for. But the deal I was saying right here is, instead of Luke Kennard, it's Onyeka Okongwu, because some might say Okongwu's a little overpaid and he could get his value rebuild in Washington, while then they could trade him, or he fits, like I said, next to Alex Sarr, who can space the floor. And over here, you would have Marvin Bagley because they need a backup big. I know some people would say Cam Whitmore, but I think they would want, and Marvin Bagley, actually, his advanced numbers have been pretty solid, and he would be someone. Am I wrong right here? Oh yeah, they would have to include Cam Whitmore in this deal. That's what I meant. It would be Cam Whitmore in this deal to get it over. And I think this is actually like one that it's not out of the realm of possibilities of happening. And if they had to include somebody else, it could be Nikola Drusic, who is making like 1.6, and this deal is allowable by 2.3. So they could include Nikola Drusic, Asa Newell, Onyeka Okongwu, Trae Young, for CJ McCollum, Corey Kispert, Cam Whitmore, Marvin Bagley, which I think Corey Kispert's better than Luke Kennard, and Luke Kennard's on expiring. So then you can make another deal to trade Luke. But everything we mentioned earlier, you're basically swapping out Trae Young with CJ McCollum, who can do what Trae's done this season at least at an efficient level. Corey Kispert, we already mentioned that. Onyeka would help out the front court for the Wizards, which they've sucked at, and Marvin Bagley will give them some depth. I don't think that's like the greatest trade in the world, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what some of the frameworks might look like that they could be going after. So let me hear your thoughts on that one, if you guys would think that would be something either team would be looking to do. But let's move on to the next team, and that next team is, of course, we got to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, because they're in an interesting position. And let me take some water to stay hydrated, ladies and gentlemen. Love some water. The Timberwolves, they're currently one of the better teams in the league. Specifically, this is a squad that is title contenders. And them being interested in Trae Young, if they can get a former All-NBA player, a 4-time All-Star at a bargain, then why wouldn't you? They're the 6th record in the West, but basically they're 2 games behind the 3rd seed. And this deal is pretty simple, in my opinion. It would be Trae Young and Nikola Drusic for Mike Conley, Julius Randle, and Rob Dillingham. They really don't have draft capital that they can offer. Rob Dillingham would be the trade sweetener. Maybe they expand this into a bigger trade to give like the Hawks other assets, and they said Rob Dillingham to another team. But Mike Conley is a former Utah Jazz player when Quinn Snyder was there. He is an acolyte of Quinn Snyder. He understands Quinn Snyder's system, which I think people will take for granted, which Quinn Snyder is known to have a very complex system, which having a guy like Mike Conley, who is probably on the last legs of his career, if not the final season, I think it's huge that they're going to be able to trade for someone who could be a spot starter and a backup that has the knowledge and seamless integration into being the backup for the Hawks, while Julius Randle fits perfect next to Kristaps Porzingis or Onyeka Okongwu and Jalen Johnson. So I think that's actually something that works well. And then Rob Dillingham could be a reclamation project for the Hawks. And then obviously Trae Young is an elite player next to Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels, who could all mask, and Jalen Clark, his defensive shortcomings. So the Timberwolves, being the 4th seed at 23-13, are right now ranked 8th in offense, 117.2 rating. However, they are having a glaring hole at point guard, which we mentioned. Mike Conley has regressed. We've all know that. Father Time has caught up. And having Conley swapped out with Trae Young, who Conley, yes, averaging 4.5 points per game on 35.7% from the field in 31 games so far, isn't pretty. Rudy Gobert is, as I mentioned earlier, a defensive anchor who's still playing well. Swapping Randall's 23 point per game, and 54% true shooting for Trae is kind of being able to bring in the scoring and the distribution that you need to fully unlock Edwards, McDaniels, and Gobert. While Trae Young replaces Conley's production immediately, he provides Rudy Gobert with a best lob passer he's ever had. And this takes the playmaking load that Anthony Edwards has been forced to take on this year, the point guard duties. So imagine he's averaging 29 points per game. Imagine now where he doesn't have to share the rock, which Edwards can just focus purely on scoring. So you have Trae Young, who's this elite creator who averages like 10 assists per game. You have 30 points a night from your primary scorer in Anthony Edwards. And then you have yourself Rudy Gobert averaging 14 rebounds and being this elite interior anchor. Naz Reid would be elevated to a starter. He replaces Julius Randle, and he's a spacer and a scorer and won't clog up the paint. You have that point of attack defender in Jaden McDaniels. And then Dante DiVincenzo. Oh, my apology. Dante DiVincenzo could be elevated, and they have Naz Reid, but I think Dante DiVincenzo probably would stay as the sixth man, because then he would be able to either alleviate and stagger the minutes for Trae and Anthony Edwards, so one stays on the floor at all times, or even do a small ball unit where they take Naz or Rudy off the floor and run Naz at center and Jaden at power forward and Dante or Edwards at the wing. And then Terrence Shannon, Jalen Clark, and you're going to start like looking at the bottom of the barrel when you start to look at the players that would have to get minutes. But I think it's one that if you're the Timberwolves, why wouldn't you do this? So you got yourself Julius Randle making 30.8, which is really like what's going to get this deal done. 10.7 from Mike Conley, and then 6.5 from Rob Dillingham. They don't have Nikola Drusic in this for some reason. So it's Nikola Drusic and Trae Young. Nikola Drusic played for Mega Serbia. He's in his second year, and he's just been assigned for the College Park. He's really not a part of the Hawks plan, so he could get waived. He's making like 1.2, so that would be the deal. And it's like, in my opinion, one that really helps the Timberwolves become a contender. They can maybe get him at a below max contract extension rate. And now you have yourself Trae Young, Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Dante DiVincenzo. You hypothetically have Johan Berenger, if you believe he can give you minutes, but Terrence Shannon, Bones Highland, Leonard Miller, Jalen Clark would all be like asked to play a lot more minutes. So maybe another trade would have to happen to fix the depth, because the depth does get gutted if you're Minnesota in this scenario. And that's something that I think you get scared, because Leonard Miller is averaging 2.5 points a game, 5 points a game from Jalen Clark, even though both Leonard Miller and Jalen Clark are going to be defensive pieces. You have Joe Ingles, who's just old and he's more of a connector, but I really don't think he's going to give you much. Then you have Terrence Shannon out there, who is another player that you have to have faith that those players are going to be able to come in and provide the depth replacement of depth production that you're losing in these trade scenarios. And that's kind of like something that I think becomes really hard, because as I just mentioned, Dante DiVincenzo would be your sixth man. That's cool. All right. I'm cool with that. Now, Naz Reid and Dante were coming off the bench. So it was like, I guess like Rob really wasn't like a huge factor. So you still have one of your best bench players there. Now you're expecting heavy minutes from Terrence Shannon, who's shown flashes that he can do it. Jalen Clark, Leonard Miller, maybe Nikola Drusic or Joe Ingles. Like, it's not pretty. Like, you're going to have to go into the bargain bin and find a way to improve. Yeah, like, you're going to have an incredible lob passer. He's going to open up things for Jaden McDaniels. He's going to help this offense that's doing well. Might hurt the defense, but overall, I think a lot of this is going to be interesting on how they like use it. So, or like how they were able to use their young players to replace the depth, because it's not going to be like they can do a bunch of trades and fix this and like able to alleviate it. That's my like whole thing, that like it becomes hard for you to sit here and be like, damn, if the Timberwolves do this, like they have to believe that they can win. And okay, like I think that's hard. Okay, that's hard to do, and you have to have faith in those players. And I don't know if Leonard Miller, Jalen Clark, Dante DiVincenzo, my God, Terrence Shannon, Joe Ingles is enough. You don't even have a backup. Bones Highland would be the backup guard. And I think that's just making my brain tick. And I just, like, it's not like free agency looks better. It's not like they're going to be able to make another move because you just gave up all of that. And yeah, I think that's the interesting part. That's the interesting part to me. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts if you're a Timberwolves fan, because if you're wondering what's another way that they could do this deal, man, the only other way that I see this deal reasonably being done is it would have to include Naz Reid, who Naz Reid won't be able to be traded till I think January 15th. And Luke Kennard would be the guy coming back. I think we just have to take off the Bird signing restriction, and we're going to also take off the recently signed restriction. So like it just doesn't. And what, the money right here, there's still $4.5 million over. So Rob Dillingham would have to be included in the deal just to get the money to work. But in this scenario, Rob Dillingham, them losing him doesn't matter. But them getting Nikola Drusic, Luke Kennard, and Trae Young, Luke Kennard would really help this team, because now, yes, the starting lineup probably looks Jaden McDaniels at power forward, Luke Kennard at small forward, Anthony Edwards at shooting guard, point guard, Trae Young. But you still have on the bench now Mike Conley. And I think that's huge. All right. So Mike Conley would then be one of those guys that would really, really, like, I know he's old as hell, but having Mike instead of the point guard options out there is huge, like so big. And I don't think people realize how much that's people are going to take for granted. And I think having this deal also gets the Timberwolves out of some financial flexibility, which also allows the Hawks, or maybe they expand this deal and they send Naz Reid somewhere else. I like the first deal better. And I don't know. I think one of the more interesting parts about this deal is it depends on the desperation of the Timberwolves. And will they be able to find a better, cheaper options in the trade market that prevents them from doing a deal here that could backfire and maybe them regretting this? Because you have to have a lot of faith that you're going to win a championship this year or next year. And I don't know if that's going to be something that they actually believe. And that's something I don't know if I actually believe. So that's what holds me back from saying they should do this deal, because if it backfires and they're not able to extend Trae, or they're just bad, they've just gutted their depth, that it's going to take a long time to rebuild. Yeah. I think that's the more and more we talk about it, I don't know if I would do it. And that's because the risk of you just giving up all these players isn't worth you maybe finding the point guard, when I think getting a guy like Anthony Simons, or even like another point guard like Tyus Jones. I'd rather just get Tyus Jones for my, like, give up maybe Rob Dillingham, and I think Leonard Miller would be able to get you Tyus Jones. So in that scenario, like real quick, let's just pull that up, because me just sitting here and thinking that through, yeah, like if I'm the Timberwolves, why am I gonna overpay and gut my depth when Tyus Jones, yeah, he's been awful for the Magic, but a Rob Dillingham for Tyus Jones, this needs to, I think they just need to include, like, I think they can legitimately do this deal if they include like a Leonard Miller, because that puts them at 8.7. Now they wouldn't be able to do that deal because it need to be a 1.7 million. Oh, the Magic would be over. So could the Timberwolves just do the swap like that? Okay, could be a Tyus Jones for Rob Dillingham swap, and that might just be better for the T-Wolves. So I think that's what, like, interesting part about that, if like they were to do something. Now, sorry for ranting super hard over the Timberwolves. We'll get into the Clippers right now. The LA Clippers, they would be an interesting landing spot for Trae Young. And look, it's really because James Harden having that player option that's only $13.3 million guaranteed on that 42.3 is a really good trade chip. And Trae Young having a diminished trade value and probably first off, Steve Ballmer will give him the max. Out of all the teams, the Timberwolves, the Clippers, the Bucks, and the Wizards, the Bucks and the Clippers are the most desperate that they would be willing to give Trae Young the max contract that he seeks. So in this scenario where Trae Young goes to the Clippers, it actually makes a lot of sense for all parties involved. So Trae Young's making $46 million this year. Nikola Drusic, for some reason, isn't on Fanspo, so he would be included in this deal. You just don't see him. He's like $1.2 million. Now, the Clippers are struggling in terms of like their season overall. They're currently after their recent win spurt, at the 13th spot, which has them, I think, tied for the 10th spot in terms of their record. I guess they're 3 games behind the Trailblazers, but same amount of wins. So they could be a play-in team at the very least. And they couldn't, they're able to squeak in. And James Harden would give the Hawks a cap flexibility chip that they could either trade again or just waive or, extend him to a deal. And he's still a really good player. And the thing with the Clippers is that, look, James Harden has become a point guard, but that team needs some youth and some help and some three-point shooting. The old guard is the 22nd ranked offense at 112 points per game. James Harden averaging 26 points per game. And if they did a deal of James Harden, Brook Lopez, and Chris Paul for Trae Young and Nikola Drusic, that works because Brook Lopez is old, but like he could be a backup center for Onyeka, Kristaps Porzingis, and Mr. Asa Newell, while Onyeka Okongwu, I don't know if I said Onyeka, but like it could work. And I think him being, in a trade that obviously clears this older generation of players. So James Harden, Brook Lopez, Chris Paul being an expiring one who could be a backup player for the Hawks, or they could trade him somewhere else. Brook Lopez, just a really good reserve big who's just old, and that's kind of like why his trade value is diminished, and he's just not as impactful, but he could play 10 minutes a night for you. And Kawhi and Trae Young become the focal point in Los Angeles, while this team that is shooting 39% from the field as a unit. Yeah, that's what the Clippers are doing. They're shooting 39% as a unit. So to me, Kawhi Leonard, who's a 28 point per game scorer when healthy, he's going to have Trae Young carry the regular season ball handling load, allowing Kawhi, who's so far this year played 25 games, to preserve his energy for the playoffs, scoring and defense. And then, hey, a reunion with a former Hawks teammate, John Collins, had his best years catching lobs from Trae Young. Maybe they can rekindle that. Zubats, the double-double machine, is going to be able to be this massive screen setter who will allow Trae Young to get free for open threes, floaters, or to throw an alley-oop to somebody. Now, even another Hawk is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's a great catch-and-shoot shooter, and he's had some of his best seasons with Trae Young. Derrick Jones Jr., once healthy, he's a great cutter. He's become a better shooter, and he's still a good defender who will cover for Trae Young's perimeter defense. Chris Dunn, another Hawks player who will also help take the toughest defensive assignments while Young is hid as the weakest. And then Cam Christie, who's a young floor spacer, continues to develop off the bench. Kobe Sanders, some rotation guard depth. And then you have Jordan Miller, Yannick Cohn-Niederhauser will give you wing and backup big depth. And then Kobe Brown. So it's like not out of this realm of possibility of like that being a feasible trade. Now, could they do the trade another way and keep James Harden? Of course, they could keep James Harden. It's actually not that hard. And I believe for Bogdan to be traded back to the Hawks, it has to be a full calendar year passing. So they would have to wait for that date. But in theory, that could be the deal that works right there. Right here, you see, if you were to do it, this would make the Clippers $3 million. So they have to include like a guy who makes just over 3.4, which could be like two dudes, which over here, or like not two dudes, could be one dude. I mean, they could really just include Bradley Beal, who's hurt and might be having a career-ending injury in the deal, and that like he just goes into free agency and they have the disabled player exception and they do that. That's the deal that you keep James Harden. The other deal that we mentioned earlier, which would be them doing the deal around Harden because there's no assets that the Clippers have that they could entice besides cap flexibility to the Hawks, and the Hawks would have to be like really desperate and, you know, wanting to do this deal. So for me, I think when you look at the Clippers, especially Chris Paul being able to be that backup point guard, Nikola Drusic is not included on Fanspo, but he would be included in your mix 1.2, so it wouldn't affect the trade, and the trade's allowable by 18.5. Chris Paul can be a backup point guard here and get some minutes or get routed somewhere else. Brook Lopez, same thing, or they have him and it's only an additional year on his contract that they move, or they just keep him and he looks better because he'll play like off the bench, and then James Harden can replace Trae Young. They can move off of him, or they could keep him and he's a solid replacement for them. It's like not like the worst guy to have as your replacement, in my opinion. Now, does this solve all the issues for the Clippers? I don't know if it like truly solves everything, but I think one of the things that it does do is maybe show that the Clippers are willing to keep trying to make this Kawhi thing work. Also, I feel like certain players that if they were included in this deal, it would be telling of like what the locker room looks like. I think this deal is the more plausible deal. Now, the one that's the Bradley Beal, John Collins, you can trade a player when he's injured. Bogdanovich. Bogdan has a team option and that would be declined. John Collins is an expiring, and Bradley's the only one who has a player option that they could just tell him that they're going to cut him regardless, or like not cut him. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like if he isn't like, if he is coming back, maybe they keep him flyer or they trade him, whatever it may be. That deal, all those players, I think the only one that maybe ends up on the Hawks is Beal. I think John Collins and Bogdan would be rerouted elsewhere. I don't know why they would bring back players that they traded, but that's just something to keep in your mind that, yeah, they can do another trade, that it isn't a James Harden, Brook Lopez, Chris Paul deal for Trae Young and Nikola Drusic. It would be the deal that is centered around John Collins, Bogdan, and Bradley Beal. Again, that would have to be a multi-team trade. However, that keeps Trae Young and James Harden and company together, which obviously is a better team than them apart. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that one. I think that one's like an interesting one, and it would happen if they were able to expand it and get some draft capital to the Hawks, but I think that one's less likely. Now, let's talk about the final team, and that will be the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks have literally been scraping every corner, looking at every nook and cranny. Right? Nuke and cranny, right? I feel like I said that right. Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, every player you could imagine, Jeremy Grant, have all been potential trade targets for the Milwaukee Bucks. Now Trae Young's here, and we've said it. Because Trae Young's trade value is diminished, this might be a 4-time All-Star, former All-NBA player that is going to pick up his $48.9 million player option next year. So you'll have him for an additional year because no one in free agency is going to give him that money. And then you might be able to give him an extension that is below the max that ends up becoming a bargain of a deal because you end up paying him below the max rate and he ends up getting back to that All-NBA level. And you have Giannis catching lobs from Trae. Now, the trade sweetener is the hardest thing to like figure out. How do you get that deal done? And that's where like I've had a tough time like trying to figure that one out too. So before we continue, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts. What would your deal be and why? So I think the easiest deal right here, and really the only thing you would do different than this deal is change Kevin Porter for Ryan Rollins. But Trae Young and Nikola Drusic makes $1.2 million, and it would just be so like they hit the league minimum of 14 players, the Bucks. So for Kyle Kuzma, Bobby Portis, and Kevin Porter Jr., this could be expanded to a bigger deal if the Hawks don't want Kyle Kuzma or Bobby Portis or both of them on the team. And the Bucks currently are a team that in the NBA, they are just behind the Hawks with the 11th seed. The Hawks are the 10th seed, and being 16-20, yeah, at 16-20, they are about 4 games behind the Bulls. Then I would say like 3 games behind. Yeah, 4 games as well behind the Cavs. Like they're like just behind the play-in and maybe trying to do what the Heat did a few years ago and use the play-in to get to the playoffs. They're mediocre on offense, averaging 113 points per game. Giannis Antetokounmpo is dominating. He's yet to have a bad game this year. 29 points per game on 64% from the field. His supporting cast doesn't have like a great playmaking teammate. Their team assist rate is 20th in the league. And their trade depth, Kyle Kuzma averaging 13 points per game on a cost-controlled contract. Bobby Portis also averaging 13 points per game and just being a really good 6-man big who can play both the 4 or the 5. And KPJ being a guy who this year so far, I don't know if you guys have been following, but Kevin Porter Jr. is a guy who has been quite a revelation for a Bucks team, being an 18.5 points per game scorer this season on 38% from 3. So don't sleep on Kevin Porter Jr. I'm not saying that like off the court you should sleep on him, but on the court you shouldn't. Now, this would be basically turning Kevin Porter Jr., Kyle Kuzma, and Bobby Portis into Trae Young, which I think is a win. Now, if it's not Kevin Porter Jr., it's Ryan Rollins, and that would be the trade sweetener, unless Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis could be sent to other teams that then send trade sweeteners or assets that the Hawks deem worthy in exchange for Kuzma and Portis, which, like, in my mind, maybe like Portis goes to the Kings for Dario Saric and Devin Carter to the Hawks, and Kyle Kuzma goes to, I'm trying, like, somebody that had maybe like, and like this becomes hard because then you would have to like figure out like how many players the Hawks could take, but the Nets for like Haywood Highsmith and Day'Ron Sharpe, but something along those lines where you could expand that trade. But having Trae Young come to the Bucks creates the league's most lethal pick and roll duo in the NBA with Giannis. That turns a 20th ranked scoring offense into probably a top 5. Now, to me, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the ultimate pick and roll partner with Trae Young's deep shooting range, you get what you thought Damian Lillard was going to do and force defenses to extend, leaving the lane wide open for Giannis. Then having Miles Turner, the ideal center for Trae Young, create space, shooting 37% from 3, protects the rim, and covers Trae Young's defensive liability. If you're able to keep Ryan Rollins, or it's Kevin Porter, both having a breakout season, and they both can play off ball as a scorer or run the second unit offense. And then you have Gary Trent, who's a volume shooter who benefits massively from the open looks Trae Young generates on drive and kicks. Cole Anthony, who would remain in this scenario, is the backup point guard that hopefully can improve his efficiency and provide instant offense whenever Young sits. Behind either Kevin Porter and Ryan Rollins. Then Taurean Prince is a 3-and-D wing that, when necessary for spacing and perimeter defense. You got Gary Bird, AJ Green, who's that elite specialist from deep, who will find him in the corners and just above the break. They have Andre Jackson, another point of attack defensive player who can be deployed against high-scoring wings and guards. And then you still have Gary Harris as a veteran shooting depth, Mark Sears, Pete Nance, like, I guess Thomas, who's a locker room presence. But, man, I really like that deal where you're able to turn, Kyle Kuzma, Bobby Portis, and Kevin Porter into Trae Young and Nikola Drusic, as like that really just instantly improves, I think personally, the Bucks situation. It says right here the Bucks would improve by what, 1 win hypothetically in this scenario. And cap wise, neither team is like hurt by it. Now, one might say, could Luke Kennard be included in the deal? Maybe. That's a possibility. We mentioned earlier, like, this multi-team trade that obviously a guy like Luke Kennard would have to be included, but just to like start to get the players work. But Dario Saric and Devin Carter are two guys who are seemingly on the way out. Even Keon Ellis, but I think they could get more than Keon Ellis. Devin Carter's not been a great situation, and maybe they take a reclamation swing at Devin. And I think right here, this is like one of the things that I find most interesting is if they can get like the Nets, because again, it's some of these deals get easier if you can include multiple players. Now, maybe it ends up being a guy like Terrence Mann instead of the combo of Sharp and Haywood Highsmith, but I knew that their contracts were, this is 11.8. Kennard makes exactly what? Kennard makes 11, exactly 11. So Day'Ron Sharp and Haywood Highsmith, I didn't know where they ended up, so I just want to make sure they're both on the Hawks. Luke Kennard ends up on the Nets in this scenario. That's like the way that I would think you do it. I know the contract is the expiring one. You get off of the money, the second years of both. Well, Day'Ron Sharp and Haywood Highsmith, I guess you turn them into Luke Kennard right here. What's the big problem we're having is that you're $127,000. Oh, yeah, because Haywood Highsmith got sent to the wrong team. That's funny. I was like, yeah, because that just didn't work out right. So trade to the Hawks. Nikola Drusic would go to the Bucks. And yeah, this would work right here. So the Kings in this scenario, they would, Bobby Portis and Kyle Kuzma would be going to Bobby Portis would go to the Kings, as I mentioned earlier. So you'd have yourself, 1 second, my apologies. Somehow I just lost that screen and don't know how I did that, but there we go. So let's try this trade right here. Yep, that's where you have Bobby Portis now. That's already still too many players, and a couple of them could get waived, like Haywood. I mean, I think they would keep Haywood, but Dario Saric would probably get waived, maybe even Haywood. They could even reorganize this where KPJ, I think they have enough ball handlers, but I wonder if Kyle Kuzma could end up in Brooklyn. That would be funny if he ends up in Brooklyn again, but expanding these deals into something along the lines to like find ways to move certain players is definitely, I think, within the realm of possibilities for a team like the Hawks to try and find. Now, I think the Hawks, if they're were really trying to not keep Kyle Kuzma, you send him to the Nets, and that's where I think a team like the Nets, there's still room for like the Bucks. Maybe this way is they're able to get like a Cam Thomas, and the Nets just trade Cam Thomas, so they're not walking away just uncompensated, and he just goes into free agency, and then they're able, Kyle Kuzma becomes an expiring next year. and the Hawks only walk away with De'Ron Sharp, Haywood Highsmith, Kevin Porter, Devin Carter, and Dario Saric. Saric gets waived, and it's only 4 players. They traded 2, and it's their depth got deeper. And now for the Hawks, I mean the Nets here in this scenario, I think they would either do an Amir. I think they would do an Amir Coffee to get like the deal done, because then if you do Amir Coffee, that should the Nets then actually hit it. So you would actually have to send Amir to a team like the Kings to get the money to actually work right there, because then the Nets are already touching it, so they wouldn't do that. So the Kings would be the one to take Amir, and that makes the deal work, I believe. 8.5. I thought you're sending Haywood Highsmith, De'Ron Sharp, Cam Thomas, Amir Coffee. Why did this deal stop working? You have 8 million, so you need to cut 8 from this deal, and that's because of the Kyle Kuzma. Oh, okay. So, and in this scenario, the Kings gave up 2 players in Dario Saric and Devin Carter, and they got themselves Bobby Portis. And all honesty, what I'm wondering is $8 million. You would have to probably find like somebody to take Terrence Mann, which would the Wizards then be the only? I just want to see if like a realistic deal can come from this, because you'd probably find a team like the Wizards to dump Terrence Mann. Maybe you send the Hawks as like trade sweetener, a Devin Carter, if that's really what like could be like considered trade sweetener. And the Wizards, who are over here now, they'd be incurring what right there, $20 million in salary. Would that open up the world of them being able to trade a salary? Or because like they have 43 coming in, so there's only an $8 million difference. And if you send both Devin Carter and Terrence Mann there, maybe it is like a Marvin Bagley sort. I mean, you got yourself De'Ron Sharp and company there. Like, this is just such a loaded, like, such a big deal that at this point, the only player that would make sense to maybe go there is like a Malachi Brannan, because they're just acting as facilitators in this deal. And what ends up happening here is the Wizards are $5 million over. So Malachi Brannan's 4.9. And I don't know why we're doing like this super trade. I've just got like super wrapped into it. So his 4.9 wouldn't be able to get that deal done. And that's where like maybe a Corey, like you either have to do 2 players or you just do a Corey Kispert, because the next largest contract to be able to get that one over is not going to be a player that they would trade. So if you did Corey Kispert instead, and they'd keep Malachi Brannan in this sense, or like you send Kispert to, yeah, because did Kennard get traded in this scenario? Yeah, we sent Kennard to the Bucks. The Bucks have Kennard, unless the Bucks are, wow, yeah, the Bucks got Kennard, if I remember correctly. Or no, yeah, the Bucks no, the Nets have Kennard. So, and yeah, they wouldn't want Corey Kispert. Yep, this is how the deal would have to go down. Wow, I took so long to make this. Bobby Portis and Amir Coffee to the Kings, Trae Young, Cam Thomas to the Bucks, Corey Kispert, De'Ron Sharp, Haywood Highsmith, Dario Saric, and Kevin Porter to the Hawks. By the way, Nikola Drusic also goes to the Bucks. And so the Hawks would be trading 3 players, and they'd waive Dario Saric, and they'd walk away with Corey Kispert, De'Ron Sharp, Haywood Highsmith, and Kevin Porter Jr. They can also reroute Kevin Porter Jr. Wizards get Terrence Mann, Devin Carter, Kyle Kuzma, and Luke Kennard to the Nets. That's not, I like the first deal we did instead of wasting our time on that one, but that was funny. Man. Now, hey, let me look at the comments over here. So I know over here, I'm reading everybody's comments. My apology, ladies and gentlemen. So let me read people's comments. We got Venta. I can't even read. CJ Bub Cam for Trae in a first. That is possible, but the Wizards have the leverage and they're demanding compensation, not the other way around. Harden, CP3, and Lopez for Trae. I think Keen Wallace is, by the way, Kason Wallace's brother. I also really like Keen. I think if they included a second player, would it be Drusic? I don't know if the Hawks would give up a pick. Now, Trae Young and Asa is the other one. I do agree. I could see that, but the stacking of John Collins, Bogdan, and it would be John Collins, Bogdan, and who would be the third player? I forgot what. Either way, John Collins, Bogdan. That would and not Chris Dunn, but not Derek Jones. Was it? I digress. Either way, that deal would require multi-team because I don't think those players would be going back to Atlanta. And Harden to the Hawks, trade to the Minnesota for Naz, Mike, and Rob. I think it would be Julius instead of Naz. I think that's just what I think, like, money-wise. Now, I think they would want to keep Kevin Porter, but if the Bucks were doing the deal, would you rather have Ryan Rollins or Kevin Porter? I'd have Ryan Rollins. Now, Ryan Rollins might be the trade sweetener that gets the deal through for the Bucks because they don't have that assets to trade it. But now the Kings are trying to get rid of their whole strategy or their whole roster. But I try to actually keep this deal right. This is like the craziest you'll ever see me make a trade. And Corey Kispert, the Wizards would just be wanting to get off that money. While same thing with Day'Ron Sharp for the Nets. That's why they give him to the Hawks. Darius Saric would probably get waived. Haywood Highsmith would be a depth piece. Kevin Porter or Ryan Rollins would be the trade sweetener from the Bucks. Now, I had Cam Thomas end up on the Bucks because they send the Nets Luke Kennard as cap flexibility, and then Kyle Kuzma, who becomes a expiring contract next year, which then becomes a trade chip for the Nets. And then they don't walk away uncompensated for Cam Thomas just going into free agency. Terrence Mann goes to the Wizards. They probably get some second round picks or whatever draft capital in this, and they get Devin Carter as a reclamation project. Amir Coffey allows the Kings to get off of Darius Saric and Devin Carter, and they bring in Bobby Portis, who can play next to Domantas Sabonis. So that was just there, and that's just because, like, I was just trying to think. I mean, that I just don't even, like, if they are able to just move off him, I think that's what they want to do. So, yeah, that's it, guys. I'm going to head out. I hope you guys did enjoy. Like, comment, and subscribe if you made it to the end. Let me know. That's going to be it for me today, guys. Peace out.